If you're anything like me, you grew up hearing a familiar version of the Columbus story. Bold, bold explorer, empty continent, the dawn of a new world. And while that position has thankfully waned, I think we need to give some credit where credit is due in helping to bring about that change in thought. In A People's History of the United States, Howard Zinn asks us to begin American history from another vantage point, not the deck of the Santa Maria, but the shore of the Bahamas, where the Arawak people first greeted Columbus with gifts, food, and trust. Hi, if you don't know me, I'm Greg, a humanities professor who talks about history and cultural studies. I'm interested in the stories beyond the surface, the history of places, and then what that tells us about the American experience and the human condition. I'm starting a new series called Chapter by Chapter, and this month we're talking about Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. This is Chapter 1, Columbus, the Indians, and Human Progress. Zinn opens A People's History with this encounter because it captures everything he wants us to question about the stories we tell. The Arawaks, he writes, were generous and open-hearted, living in societies built on sharing and cooperation. Columbus, meanwhile, arrived under orders from the Spanish crown to find gold, claim territory, and return with profit. What followed was not a meeting of civilizations, but a collision, one that turned quickly to violence, enslavement, and extermination. Drawing heavily on Columbus's own journals, Zinn shows that the admiral himself recorded the innocence and kindness of the islanders, and in the same breath, planned to take them captive and exploit them. Within a generation, the population of Hispaniola, once numbering hundreds of thousands, was devastated by forced labor, hunger, and disease. Zinn's point is not to shock for its own sake, but to reveal what he calls the quiet consent behind heroic myths, how textbooks turn conquest into discovery by deciding whose suffering does not count. From there, Zinn broadens the lens. He reminds us that European expansion was driven by more than curiosity. It was fueled by a growing system of empire and commerce. The Spanish sought gold and slaves. Later, the English and Dutch would seek land and markets. What made the Americas new was not their discovery, but their sudden incorporation into an economic world that valued resources over lives. Zinn contrasts two traditions of history writing. The first celebrates the winners, highlighting courage, navigation, and progress. The second, the one that he invites us to join, well, that one begins with the people who paid the price, the enslaved, the conquered, the silenced. For Zinn, objectivity that ignores moral cost is not neutral. It's an endorsement of power. History, he argues, always has a point of view, and pretending otherwise only hides whose interests are being served. He ends the chapter with a challenge to the reader to think of progress not only in terms of ships and maps and empires, but in terms of human consequences. The birth of the modern Western world was also the beginning of genocide and slavery in the Americas. If we're honest, we have to hold both truths at once. So, what lessons should we take from this opening chapter? Well, first, Zinn teaches us that where we begin a story matters. If we start with Columbus, we get discovery and triumph. If we start with the Arawaks, we see generosity betrayed and a warning about greed. The beginning shapes everything that follows. Second, history is a moral act. Choosing which voices to include and which to omit, defines the world we imagine and the citizens we become. Zinn reminds us that, like maps and diaries, empathy is a form of evidence. Third, progress and brutality can coexist. Civilization is not a straight line upward. It's a tangle of innovation and exploitation. Recognizing that complexity doesn't weaken love of country. It deepens understanding of it. Fourth, acknowledging injustice is not self-hatred. It's responsibility. Zinn was a World War II veteran himself. He believed that honest history builds stronger citizenship by teaching us to question authority and resist repeating old patterns. And finally, hope lies in awareness. Once we see history from the ground up, we can imagine different futures. Zinn writes not to condemn the past forever, but to empower readers to make new choices, to write a story where humanity outweighs conquest. So, when we revisit the first page of American history, we're not erasing it, we're restoring it. We're listening to the people who were there first, and we're asking how their voices might still guide us. Because, as Howard Zinn reminds us, history is not what happened. History is what we choose to remember and what we choose to do with it. Now, this opening chapter sets the tone and method for the entire book. By beginning with Columbus and the Arawaks, Zinn signals that this will not be a history told from the palaces of power, but it's a history told from the ground up, from the point of view of the conquered, the enslaved, the workers, and the dissenters. He uses the encounter in 1492 as both a moral and narrative framework. Every era in every chapter that follows will echo that first collision between greed and generosity, empire and resistance. In the chapters ahead, Zinn continues this pattern, turning familiar stories inside out to reveal the human cost beneath the myths of progress. The exploitation of the Arawaks becomes the template for slavery, expansion, industrial capitalism, and even modern warfare. By starting with this act of discovery, Zinn reminds readers that American history is not just a series of achievements, but a long conversation about power, conscience, and who gets to define civilization itself. Hey, if you enjoy this type of journey, like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me your thoughts about the chapter, about Zinn's approach, or if you're of a certain age, tell me what it was like when you first learned about Christopher Columbus' discovery of America back in elementary school. Join us. for more journeys through history.